Hello, this is Module 2, Status of Education, Engineering, and Enforcement in the United States. So this is a PowerPoint presentation. I'll be narrating it, and I've never seen such a big spider web behind me, so I want to get this thing done before that spider comes back out and is hungry. So let's get going. So we're going to talk about a few things here, but don't forget, there's a lot of good stuff in the book, and this is a very good book for this course. And don't take everything just from here, because the quizzes and exams are coming from the book, not from this PowerPoint. So this is Chapter 2, Status of Education, Engineering, and Enforcement in the United States. Hey, good country. Overview: identify the basic concepts of education, enforcement, and engineering, what they mean, and how it relates to fire prevention. Describe the relationship between prescriptive-based codes and performance-based codes. Explain the concept of community risk reduction. List the 5 interventions associated with community risk reduction, also called CRR. This is what community risk reduction is. It's kind of definition of it. Local level commitment to develop internal and external partnerships with the community to implement programs, initiatives, and services that promote an integrated approach to the risk of injury and loss through education, engineering, enforcement, economic incentives, and emergency response. It sounds like a good bit, doesn't it? But just think about the problem that it is here. You've got community full of people, of course, and there's a hazard among them, and that's a fire hazard. Now, how are you going to get this out to these people and get them to know what they have to do and help them and everything? So that's a pretty bold project. So community risk reduction, trying to risk the reduction of fires in the community. So this is the preventive interventions in CCR: education, engineering, enforcement, economic incentives, and emergency response. So we're going to talk about each one of those in detail. That's kind of like the whole chapter right there. But again, this is just the head. This is just the top of it here, the tip of the iceberg. You got to read the book to get all the details. And it's a very good book. The traditional 3 E's were this: education, engineering, and enforcement. Education are actions that teach, promote awareness, present information, and conduct activities intended to change behavior that increases people's safety from fire. Makes sense? Much more widespread in recent years. There's fire and smoke alarms are way more common than they used to be. Residential sprinklers are becoming a little bit more common. There's a good video in this module about residential sprinklers. It's a home security video that a candle starts to drapes on fire, and you'll see how fast it spreads. Stop, drop, and roll. Wasn't that long ago that that's not, people didn't even know what that was. They kind of, if their clothing did catch on fire, they'd run, and that was like the worst thing you can do. So now we've got people to figure out they should stop, drop, and roll. And control of hazardous materials. And they talk about hazardous materials here. I'm sure they're talking about combustible materials, since this is a fire prevention course. Fire prevention is defined as to limit unwanted ignition, and if you do have an unwanted ignition, to decrease the spread of it. Public fire safety education is important. Plan reviews prior to new construction of a building. You have a plan, you submit it to a planning board, building board, whatever you want to call it. They review the plans, make sure the exits and everything are there, proper. Arson, fire investigation. So if something happens like this on arson or fire, either one, they're investigated thoroughly. The at-risk populations: children younger than age 5. They're more than twice as likely to be killed in the fire than an adult. And the elderly. Sometimes the elderly, sometimes we're not, sometimes they're not conducive to new things, and they don't want to leave their homes. Fire fatality rates have drastically increased over 90 years. In 1913, it was 9.1 fatalities per 100,000 population. In 2003, that's down to 1.4 per 100,000 population. That's a pretty dramatic increase, and that's going in the right direction. That's what I want to see. Now, the top 3 causes for fire in rural areas, believe it or not, there's a higher rate of deaths in rural areas than in urban areas. But the top 3 causes for fire in rural areas is heating devices, smoking, and electrical distribution or electrical fires. heating devices. A lot of those, I'll bet, are portable heaters. This is just a photo of a firefighter and working with them on a CRR, the people to lay out their place of where they work, where they live, for emergency exits. Have to do a little planning ahead of time. And then this one here says residential fire sprinklers have been referred to as firefighters living in your home with you. Sprinklers work. Sprinklers are great. And if they were in more homes, would be a good thing, probably. A systematic engineering, this is the definition, a systematic approach to adopting community codes and certifying officials with authority to inspect the extent of code compliance and to implement rules and regulations to clarify the application of codes. This is the engineering aspect of it. Using codes to ensure a reasonable degree of safety. Codes, you know what building codes are. They're the rules and regulations, what you have to do, kind of like OSHA, but for building codes. Development and enactment of fire safety codes. Building codes generally do not apply to existing buildings. After a building is already built, it's kind of hard to apply codes to it. Enforced usually by a building department of the locality. Address fire safety from a building construction standpoint. Usually fire safety people and building people work hand in hand to make sure that when the building is built, that the fire safety things are thought about too, such as the way doors open up, a number of exits, etc., accessibility to exits. Development and enactment of fire safety codes. Fire prevention codes are concerned with fire safety, of course. Fire protection equipment, such as fire extinguishers, sprinkler systems, maintenance of buildings, hazardous materials, and that includes the surfaces in the building. Also anything that has a chemical that you might bring into the building. And those are usually enforced by the fire department, those codes. Now, there's a lot of model codes out there. The model fire prevention codes, the NFPA Uniform Fire Code. It covers subjects typical of most modern municipal, state, or county codes. It's adopted by many jurisdictions, covers general fire safety requirements, and it's updated every few years. NFPA is National Fire Prevention Association. They do a lot. The International Building Code, the most common building code in the United States. It's adopted at the local level in all 50 states. It covers new construction, has like structural requirements in there. And again, that's usually done by the building department. Housing codes ensure citizens have adequate housing facilities. Inspection authority generally broader than that for other departments. So it's generally the housing department has more authority over going into somebody's houses and checking things than say the fire department does. Zoning codes, various types of occupancies are limited to given sections of the community. Example, storage of flammable liquids prohibited in high value mercantile districts. It's like you can't have manufacturing come in and put a big factory right next to your house, probably, because the zoning doesn't allow that. That's a good thing. Electrical codes, electrical safety is closely related to fire prevention. Why? Because a lot of fires are caused by electrical, and usually it's installation. There's a national electrical code. And again, the major enforcement problem is installation because it's just kind of hard to see everything that's going in. Plumbing, heating, and air conditioning codes are also out there related to fire prevention. Sprinklers, for example, because sprinklers have water in them. They're a lot of things, they're related to plumbing. HVAC may spread smoke and sparks, can be carried through ductwork. Forestry codes related to fire prevention. They're enforced usually at the state level, and they'll sometimes prohibit open burning or applying burning restrictions. And as a rule, generally the forestry codes start at the edge of the forest. So they don't usually take, in the cities and towns, they're not enforced there. Reference standards, model buildings, the fire codes reference national standards. Many standards published by the National Fire Protection Association. Types of codes are prescriptive and performance. I'll talk about each one of those. Prescriptive means building and fire codes have long been prescriptive, detailing what needs to be done in order to comply. In other words, in these codes, they will say that this exit has to be this wide, or the doorway has to be at least this high. And they give you specific details of what has to be done. And that's kind of good because then it's really easy to see if you've complied with them. Now they've started to do some municipality performance codes. They don't use quantitative requirements. they're difficult to determine compliance. So they'll say, for instance, instead of saying a 2-hour fire resistant wall, they'll say, well, it has to be done so the people are going to get all out in 8 minutes or something along those lines. But many building and fire code enforcement officials do not feel comfortable administering a performance-based code. It's very hard to do, to administer it, to see if somebody's in compliance or not. So many maxi codes are prohibited from adopting codes less or more stringent than the state code. So these codes are, that's it. You can't do anything but these. And it gains uniformity of application by all means, but inhibits local jurisdiction from adopting more stringent fire protection requirements. For instance, some really windy or dry areas, like near a desert, something like in Southern California, you might want to have a little bit stricter codes than you have elsewhere. Like in OSHA, you can, any state can make laws that are more restrictive than OSHA's laws. They have to be at least as stringent as OSHA laws. But they don't allow that with these mini maxi codes. NFPA standards, some of them, 10 is portable fire extinguishers, 13 automatic sprinklers, 30 flammable and combustible liquid, 58 LP gas. NFPA 70 is the National Electrical Code. NFPA 101 is the Life Safety Code. Enforcement, that's kind of a harsh word to some people. They like to prefer to call it compliance, but it's pretty much the same thing. Unwanted alarms, 2 false alarms for every 1 reported fire. And it's a significant fire protection concern because if the fire department's out on a nuisance call, they can't be there when a real call comes in. Nuisance alarms are like false alarms that are called in on purpose. Reducing the impact, sometimes they're going to penalize for excessive false alarms. Many have unintended consequences. For instance, in Montgomery County, Maryland approach, they made alarm users aware that they were non-conforming, but they didn't fine them. And they said additional alarms would render their system unreliable and then have to post a fire watch. So the unintended consequence here that's mentioned is if you're going to threaten to penalize a company financially, if they have more false alarms, they're liable to just turn off their system. And you don't want that to happen. Economic incentives. Historically, motivation for fire prevention was economic. In other words, you had a fire, it's going to cost you some money. You're going to lose your building, your business, health maybe, or people could, so it was economic. Smoke alarm installation programs in some municipalities, smoke alarms are given them out free. People can't afford them, even installing them. Incentives for developers, builders, and building owners to make their places more fire safe. And Riverside County, California program, they got a DHS grant for Class A roofs and for clearing of space around the building. So, and Riverside County is right next to San Bernardino County, which is mainly the Mojave Desert. So up in that area, it's up in the Riverside County, a lot of it's up in the high desert, and it gets pretty windy and pretty dry up there. Emergency response. It's a critical function of community risk reduction is emergency response. Obviously, a fire department. Complete prevention of all fires not likely achievable. I worked for 1986 for a season for H&R Block. I took their class, went to work for them, and it was interesting. I really liked it too. And one Sunday morning, it was a quiet Sunday morning, and I was working, and this couple came in, and I did their taxes for them. They were very nice. And as we were done, the lady got a nosebleed, a very bad nosebleed. And there were some other women in the office, and they took her in the ladies' room, but they couldn't get it to stop. So they called 911, and the fire department showed up, took her out. Ooh, okay, fine. So things calmed down, get back to my desk. Another couple comes down and sits in front of me, and I says, okay, full disclosure. The last couple I did their taxes for, I had to take her out of here in an ambulance. Nothing to do with their taxes, but they looked at me like, what? I had to explain it to them. Anyhow, complete prevention of all fires is not likely achievable. Well, that's never going to happen. You're going to have complete prevention of all fires. So that's everybody knows that. Summary, we have the original 3 A's, which are the first of these 5 methods of intervention: education, engineering, enforcement, and then economic incentives and emergency response were added by the CRR. So Again, this has been just a quick overview of what's going to happen in this chapter. So be sure to read the book. It's very well written and it's not a bad read at all. And good luck to you.